Why does Aaron Gwyn need to meet Mike Perry? I got two great authors hanging out with me talking about the gentle roughness of the people who raised them, losing fingers, miscellaneous traumatic injury stories. We got lots of those. The professors, the kind adults, the people who are there at the right place and the right time in their lives to make a difference. Society's problem with these parasocial relationships. Nancy Pelosi won't help you change your tire. You're going to love that section. And of course, the positive upside of positive imposter syndrome. This is amazing. You guys are going to love this. We had such a good hang. Jack Forehand, let's roll some clips.
Well, when I was 9, I cut my index finger off. We were riding this 2-seater go-kart. I was 9. My buddy was driving, and the chain that ground all the gears, it was like a chain on a chainsaw. And so the chain had come off and kind of whipped through the air. And my buddy Randy was reattaching the chain. And he looked up at me and said, "Aaron, your finger." And I hadn't even noticed. And I looked down and my finger was completely like severed. It was dangling by skin.
And so I got one time to write the completely true line that I took my pigs from a one-handed butcher with 2 eyes.
Amazing.
To a 2-handed butcher with 1 eye.
Beautiful. And when I got it back from him, it was just covered with ink. And there was a long note. And he said, "Mr. Gwyn, I predict that one day you will earn a fair living with a pen."
My feelings weren't hurt. Instead, I felt like I was in football practice because I was the kid who, if the coach said, "Hit him harder," and I was go, "Okay, I sure will." And
Right.
Everything he said, instead of going, "No, wait, that's my baby," I was like, "Oh," and I couldn't wait to get home to revise.
When you have a flat tire, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, they're not going to come over and help you. Your parasocial relationships with these strangers that I'm not saying are unimportant, but if you like push away the actual human beings in your life for people you will never meet.
If you go to one of my events, like if you went to that one in northern Wisconsin the other night, if you saw the voting rolls, they definitely slanted one way, but they weren't 100%. And I want it to be that way because
right.
I am able, in talking like I was raised, telling stories about guys getting kicked by dead cows and talking about logging, but also talking about art and metaphor and hope and spirituality.
That's right.
In a context where we all then have a conversation. And the minute that I get into what I call the binary in the political sense, then that's it. I used up all my powder and it's over.
You're watching Just Press Record right here on Cultish Creative YouTube, the show where I take 2 strangers from my network of misfits, miscreants, and mysteriously curious people that I'm so convinced they should meet. I send them a blind calendar invite with no warning of who's going to show up when they get here and we just press record. So don't forget, head on over to panoptica.ai, not just our sponsor, but featuring work from both of these fine gentlemen. So who are they? I figured I could pitch them both with books that the other guest definitely, absolutely, without question, wrote. This first guest, he goes by a pen name. You might recognize this. He wrote this book. This is Cormac McPerry, Yo Country Tour Bus Drivers for Old Men. And it's a real classic. There are tales of country tour bus drivers that the Washington Post calls the profoundly disturbing and gorgeously rendered the most accessible of all his work. Isn't that just adorable what the Post said? Now, how can you learn by not asking the same questions as a lower tier staff writer for a local publication covering national touring artists when you start asking about the absolute regular people they work with, i.e. their tour bus drivers? Because there's philosophy in those relationships between the stars of the stages, the steerers of the stagecoaches. There's wisdom in these background characters. Let me dox him, the sneezing cow himself, long beds musician, multiple-time author and essayist, Michael Perry. How you doing, Mike? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing great. Wow, that's a pretty good intro. Thanks.
That was a great intro, huh?
Yeah, there's times I just did a speaking event the other day and the person introducing me was not real polished. That's not his fault. He's polished at other things. But he started reading the extended internet bio, and I just had to cut him off because, like, no, dude, none of us, me first, wants to hear this. So congratulations on going in a completely different direction.
Well, sir, we're going to be extra good for this one because this other author, you might have heard of Aaron Gwyn. I don't know if you know Aaron. Tons of fun. An amateur ambles through feline philosophy and Gnostic cat conservatism. Note he's clutching his kidneys here in the image. That's a real thing. It might sound like a terrible comic strip, but in reality, it's a tale of the cross-species struggle with the basic lived experience, of the joy and suffering that comes in between consumption and sleeping. Because just like how every president and every pauper eats, sleeps, and suffers all the same, Garen peels back so many layers of what is a universal experience and search for meaning. The main character, too, who's referred to only as the kitten in the beginning, the senior cat by the end, which you just gotta love an arc like that. Good God, I'm changed forever. Who's this lasagna-loving author? Why, none other than the author himself, professional guitar slinger, professor, and maker of heavy metal slopes. Aaron Gwyn, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
This is a good time. I like that you're burning in a hellfire behind you. Is that what's going on that?
Yeah, it's sort of in perpetuity.
In perpetuity. The only way to be.
I heard
That's
that's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
All right, we're starting with some fun Easter eggs. I think Mike, you gotta tell Aaron the story about the tour bus drivers, because there's good Easter eggs here.
Yeah, and so I came to all of this backward. I'm a farm kid from northern Wisconsin. Grew up milking cows and working on a ranch in Wyoming and slinging sawmill slabs, and then I went to nursing school, so I have a nursing degree. And then I very accidentally detoured into freelance writing, and this was back when there were magazines you could actually write for, and I'd take any gig. I wrote speeches, I wrote used car ads for the radio, whatever it took to pay the rent. But at some point, I very accidentally, and that's a whole nother story, wound up being the country music writer. And it was because someone told someone some inaccurate information, and the editor of Country Music Weekly called me one day and said, "Are you the guy who writes about country music?" And I said, "Yes, I am."
Fantastic.
Anyway, this led me to be assigned these very short little 300-word pieces by, I think it was called Country Weekly. It was a publication out of Nashville about country music. And there had popped up all these country music festivals in the general region where I'm from in Wisconsin, and they wanted someone to cover it. So they would send me out there with the four or five standard questions. And because I was the freelance stringer, I was always the last person in line after the TV people, after the radio people, and after the local newspaper even. So I would get to watch as you got your 5 minutes with the Brooks and Dunn or whoever it was.
Right.
And I would just watch each person ahead of me ask the same 5 questions, hey, what do you think of the Country Jam Festival? Oh, we love the Country Jam Festival. But it's all because of the fans. The fans make it amazing. Oh, how's your new album doing? The new album's doing great. And it's all because of the fans. We just want to thank the fans. And so they would go through these 4 or 5 rote questions that these poor folks are answering day after day after day. And I knew that Country Weekly had insisted that I ask those same 4 questions. So I knew we were going to do it. But I just remember thinking there's got to be, as long as Country Weekly got me access, there's got to be a way for me to get some sort of inside thing that might turn into a better story without being what in the business they call a GERM, which is don't abuse your access. And so one day it hit me. And so I was interviewing somebody, it might have been Brooks and Dunn or Charlie Daniels, someone from that era. And I did my 5 rote questions and they gave their 5 rote answers. And then I just said, "Hey, tell me about your bus driver." And then there was this little moment, and then whoever was like, "Oh man, Hoot Gibson, let me tell you about Hoot," and I then got 30 minutes of bus driver stories. And Charlie Daniels said, "Oh, come on and meet him, get on the bus." And the next thing I know, I'm on the bus with Charlie Daniels while his wife is cooking us dinner. And
Fantastic.
yeah, so that's the reference that Aaron is making. And there's just a lot of lessons to be drawn from that. And the best thing of all, of course, was people were always trying to figure out who's on the bus, those fancy tour buses. And I was the same, who's on the bus. But then I realized, no, if the real story, if you really want to make it on the bus, ask about the person at the steering wheel. So yeah, I think that's what you're referring to, Matt. Yeah.
I grew up I'm a farm kid too. I grew up on a ranch, cattle ranch in Oklahoma. So a lot of what you say is very familiar to me.
So you can imagine the discussions I had around the old Brandon fire when I explained that I was using my cowboy wages to put myself through nursing school.
Yeah. For sure. I never made any cowboy wages. I was always just voluntold to to go do something.
That's a great phrase.
Yeah, and I did all the usual stuff, like I hauled hay in the summer in Oklahoma and all that backbreaking stuff.
I like that voluntold. It reminds me, there's all these, when you grow up working class and farming, there were always all these phrases. I remember my dad, someone asked him about manure handling equipment, and he just would point to us boys. He says, we've got Armstrong pitchforks.
That's fantastic. Armstrong pitchfork.
And then there was another thing, and this is a little esoteric to the small dairy herd, but back in the day, we milked our cows, and then we had to lug the full milk cans to the milk house and dump it in. And there came a thing called a step saver, it was a long hose that went back to the bulk tank. And then there was this kind of bucket on wheels, and you could just pour the milk in right behind the cow, and it would then be pumped to the bulk tank. And at the time, it was kind of high-end tech. And I remember somebody saying to my dad, because he said about having to carry the milk and dump it, and someone said, you should get yourself a step saver. And he pointed to me and my brother. He said, I got 2 of them.
That is amazing. It's interesting because I don't have any familiarity with dairy cows. We had beef cattle, Black Angus cattle, and then we had show cattle, which Brahmas. And so I was an FFA kid. You probably know what that means. I have to explain that to a lot of people, right? And so, I showed my heifer at the county fair and all that kind of stuff.
I'm so glad you brought up FFA, because I have an anecdote for that too. Because my dad, I've made him sound like kind of this caustic dude. He was one of the most reflective, thoughtful, meditative, insightful, gentle people I've ever known. But he had a very wry sense of humor, and he had that sense of humor where he'd say something, and then 5 minutes later you'd say, oh, that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
But we did have a small family farm, and we had a huge fluctuating family. My folks took in all kinds of foster children and children with disabilities of all sorts. And so there really wasn't, he was, I'm sure when I look back, hanging on by his fingernails financially.
Sure.
It was a very loving home. It was a safe home. I had a wonderful childhood, but we were poor by definition. And so we had to pitch in. We weren't overworked. I had friends who grew up on farms who were treated like the worst of free labor.
Right.
But we were expected to pitch in. And one time I went home to Dad and I said, hey, they're sending around memberships for FFA, and some of my friends are joining. I wonder if I could join FFA. And he said, no, you know what FFA stands for, right? I said, no. He said, Father Farms Alone.
Oh my gosh. That's too true. I'm taking back this memory when I had asthma as a kid. And now I wonder, did I have asthma, or did I just grow up around a bunch of farm animals I was allergic to, right? And breathing their dander. So I was showing my heifer at the county fair one fall, and I'd been in these cattle barns and messing around all day long. And that night, when we got back to the ranch, my emergency hailer wasn't working. I was having more and more trouble catching my breath. So my grandparents I was raised by my grandparents, and they ended up running me to the emergency room. And by then, my breathing passages were almost completely stopped up, constricted, whatever they are. And they hit me with adrenaline, and it opened everything immediately. But I can remember my grandmother was holding on to me, and the adrenaline hit, and it felt like a freight train coming through my chest. And I just burst into tears because of just the interaction of that drug. And I was like, wow, this is really the strongest drug in the world, this adrenaline stuff.
Well, and the constriction of breathing. I mean,
yeah.
Choking. So the oxygen coming back and that all at once, that had to be.
Yeah, it was intense. And after that,
that's more than the Pulp Fiction stabbing scene.
I never even thought about the Pulp Fiction stabbing scene, but it bears some resemblance. After that, my granddad was like, okay, you don't have to do as much of this. He didn't want me to, I think it hurt him to see me suffer like that. And he was a very They were both really good people, really kind people. He's still around, so he's 90
Yeah.
years old and still a very kind and thoughtful person.
Yeah, there was a sort of gentle roughness to the folks that raised me,
I like that.
farmers, lumberjacks. I do a whole bit that's not a bit, it's just a story about, despite your grandfather's kindness, one of the funniest things that can happen to working class people is if somebody gets hurt.
Oh my
once-
gosh, that's the truth, right?
Yeah, I always say if your buddy gets hit in the head with a monkey wrench, once you establish that he's still breathing and he's probably going
right.
to be able to walk again, well, then nothing's funnier than your buddy getting hit in the head with a monkey wrench.
It really is. There's a release to it. I can't remember. I don't know. So many, as we're talking about this, so many memories are just popping in. I can remember when I was 11 or 12. We had our show cattle, which were all just big pets, and we had our beef cattle, which didn't have names and were kept apart. And so we were raising this one heifer for slaughter, and there was a man who would come out and slaughter right there, then pack all the meat up, and then go process it, and then wrap everything up and bring it to you, right? So my granddad came in, and he goes, we're getting ready to go slaughter this heifer. You want to come down to the barn? And I was like, yeah, sure. So we walked down there, and I don't know what I was expecting. We walked into the barn, and the heifer was tied up in the corral there. And the guy got a .22 rifle, shot the heifer in the head, and cut its throat. Heifer went down. And then they walked out of the barn to get something for some reason. Anyway, I was left alone with the heifer, and she's bleeding out, and then she stands back up.
Oh my gosh.
How old are you?
I'm 11 or 12.
Okay.
And she stands back up, and she starts, this is graphic, I apologize, but she starts trying to moo, and she's gurgling. And I'm just white as a sheet, probably, right? I'm just watching this thing I had no idea that I was going to see. And then she goes down, and, right? And then so my granddad and this guy come back in, and my granddad looks at me and goes, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "That cow just stood up." He goes, "What?" I was like, "That cow just got back up." And he goes, "Huh." And the guy was looking at me like, I've never heard of that. And I just walked past them, like through the barn bay, up the road to the house. Didn't say a word, just walked. And that was the last cow I ever watched slaughtered.
Yeah, we grew up with a lot of about every other thing you're saying is just tripping all these wonderful memories. And I thought of something about the Black Angus that you mentioned, and I thought of something about cows that we could maybe revisit later. But on the subject of butchers, yeah, I mean, even here on this little place where we live, for the first several years, we raised a few pigs, and there's a guy that comes out and slaughters right on the farm.
Yep.
One of the earliest pieces I ever wrote was an essay about a buddy I grew up with who's a traveling butcher and going out to butcher pigs when it was 20 below, and just, and he's got his bare hands and he's out there just talking and it's that kind of stuff where, this is a whole nother discussion. I get the whole, we're just tough blue collar people things gets way overdone. And I have a rich and delightful life thanks to delicate people on the coasts, and I love them.
Sure.
But there is something to that baseline toughness. And then also what's tied to it is the humor thing, because I've had some of my more refined friends be aghast at at the jokes you make. And the story I love to tell that, and the reason I brought up, it's actually a source of humor. And if there's real trouble, it's like this, we come together,
of course.
Like my brothers and I, very rough people,
Mm-hmm.
but and we stay out of each other's lives, and we don't want to talk about our feelings, and you can't
Right.
make me. But
Right.
but if there's trouble, you're absolutely there. And I think part of it comes from just that roughness. And there's two stories, if I can remember them both. You mentioned the traveling butcher, and one of my favorite lines that I got to ever write. I grew up with a guy we call Bob the One-Eyed Beagle, and we call him the One-Eyed Beagle because, and I'm just, he is severely strabismic, if I'm going to be, but he is severely cross-eyed.
Right.
And nobody jokes about it more than him. And he has a great story that he tells. And I think in my book, Population 45, he tells this great story over and over. He wasn't always cross-eyed. And he tells the story about how he came to be cross-eyed. And I can't do it. I can't do it in public because it's utterly untrue, completely hilarious, and just slightly naughty.
Right.
But he's fine with me joking about it. And I have a whole bit I do when I do my live performances, but there's always a point where people will get a little edgy. Like, and I've even had people come up to me and say, it's very insensitive.
Right.
How you talk about it. And I always go, well, he's aware. Like, he's checked it out in the mirror.
That's how he dealt with it, and that's how he taught you to deal with it, right? Like,
he has a tattoo of a cross-eyed beagle on his bicep, so it's not like we need to tiptoe around it. But anyway, you mentioned the traveling butcher, and one of my favorite lines ever is so my friend Bob, the one-eyed beagle, he does some butchering for us, not on the farm stuff, but like processing, and he does, when we had pigs, he made the sausage, and so it just so happens that the butcher down here that comes to the farm to actually slaughter the pigs has only one hand, and he has a hook. And so he butchers with one good hand and one hook, and it's astounding to watch. But he would come to the farm, butcher the pigs, then I would take the carcasses to my friend Bob to be processed. And so I got one time to write the completely true line that I took my pigs from a one-handed butcher with two eyes.
Amazing.
To a two-handed butcher with one eye.
Beautiful.
But that's the kind of thing where you're just like, and the other story I was going to say about the humor is one of my brothers is a logger. They both kind of log, but one full-time, and he was logging way up north in a very, this speaking of graphic. So he's logging way up northern Wisconsin, very remote area. He fells a tree, he's limbing it.
Oh, man. Already, I don't like where this is going.
Nope. He walks up the tree, he's limbing it, then he comes back down the trunk and he steps off the end of the trunk. Well, it was one of these winters with a lot of snow. And he steps off into the snow and he over rotates, and there's a sapling that's been cut off at an angle. Oh. And it is driven through his neck.
Oh my gosh.
And out the back of his mouth. Oh. So the blood gushes, he slaps his hand on it. When he's telling me the story later, his complete quote is, "Yeah, I figured that was probably it." So he's holding his hand, trying to get the blood to stop. He's in the middle of nowhere. Thank goodness he had his helper Al with him. And as my brother tells it, he goes, "Yeah, Al is running around going, 'What do I do? What do I do? What do I do?'" And my brother says, "Well, start the truck."
Yeah.
So he hauls him out of the woods down to the nearest city where there's a hospital. They can't handle him there. They fly him to a trauma center down near where I live. It turns out, despite the horrific nature of the wound, there's nothing much to be done because you don't sew it up. That creates a pocket for infection.
And he missed everything. Like he
missed everything somehow.
Thankfully, he missed the carotid artery. I'm assuming he wouldn't be around.
And so he gets in but they do overnight put him in the ICU for observation in case he hemorrhages or throws a clot. Well, his family and little kids are way up north, so I got elected to be the one to stay overnight in the recliner next to the bed in the ICU. Now he's tough he's one of these 150-pound guys, 5'4", not an ounce of fat on him, and you see him and you just think bar fight, right? And so he can handle himself. And I'm the soft-handed writer brother, but he's still my little brother. So I would wake up intermittently in the night and I would look at him in the half light of the ICU and I'd feel tender toward him. And then morning comes and one of our knuckleheaded cousins shows up and he stops at the foot of the bed and he looks at my brother who has suffered this horrible injury. And my cousin says, "Oh, well, you're going to be able to stay underwater forever now that you got a gill."
Yeah. So what was the recovery like for him?
There was nothing to do because he actually, ironically, they put a tube down his nose and compressed a nerve while doing it. He got hurt worse by the tube going down his nose.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those odd things where he just, as you noted, he missed everything. And anyway, the whole point being, there's times when a lovely Hollywood agent or literary agent in New York is paying for your asparagus truffle foam, and you're very grateful and you're enjoying it, but you just know that you can handle some stuff they can't.
Yeah. I haven't seen injuries quite that bad. I've seen a few on the farm. Well, when I was 9, I cut my index finger off.
Mm.
We were riding
Clean?
go-karts. Yeah. I don't know if the camera will
Okay.
pick it up, but I was riding go-karts with another farm boyfriend. And I'm sure Michael grew up doing like three-wheelers and quad runners and motorcycles, and we had all that stuff. We were riding this two-seater go-kart. I was 9. My buddy was driving, and the chain that the engine ran and that ground all the gears, it was like a chain on a chainsaw, and there was a broken link, and it kept coming off, and he'd have to reattach it. And so the chain had come off and kind of whipped through the air. And my buddy Randy was reattaching the chain, and he looked up at me, said, "Aaron, your finger." And I hadn't even noticed. And I looked down, and my finger was completely like severed. It was dangling by skin, had crushed the bone, severed all the tendons, and like the blood was just welling out of my finger. And I like just looked down, then I lit out across the pasture to his mom, and they took me to the hospital, and they were able to reattach everything. There was no nerve damage. But it hadn't occurred to me till that moment that you could be like hurt very badly and have no idea. I didn't feel anything until I saw it.
The
It's,
trajectory.
this
Wait,
is-
wait. How does do you make sense in your brain how that got to your hand to sever this
So,
finger?
Yeah, right. So the chain,
I
it's a
needed
two-seater.
ballistics, Mike. I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
asked
yeah.
for ballistics.
It's a two-seater go-kart. I was in the passenger seat. My buddy Randy's was behind the wheel. The engine was right behind his head, and so there was like a grab bar on my side and then a grab bar on his far side. And so my arm had been kind of like behind his head, kind of holding on, and we had hit like a little, I don't know, a little depression, and the chain had come flinging like that way. And so I guess my hand went up, and the chain just cut through it, and cut through it so
Triangularity.
cleanly that I didn't even feel it. Like there wasn't, it probably didn't even really slow the chain down that much. It was just whipping through the air, right? And like the way it was bleeding, like by the time I looked down, I mean, I can remember just the blood like welling, right? And the hospital they took me to was 20 minutes away. I can remember my grandmother driving, sitting on my friend's mother's lap. And thankfully they put me in a cast from like the tips of my fingers up to my elbow for, I don't know, however long, but everything healed. I have full, like I had to do exercises afterwards, but that was, I think, the worst I was injured on the farm or on one of my buddy's farms.
I think if you could see the lattice of interconnectedness of this conversation, you would think that Matt fed it into some machine. Because
I know.
as you're telling
by
me
the
this-
end, you'll guess why I wanted you to meet.
Oh, yeah.
Severed limbs are not part of my answer.
I don't think we were supposed to just talk about trauma medicine.
I know,
all the
I
time,
know,
But
I
here we are. But my boss in Wyoming, of all places, you two sometime maybe can meet, because he's missing 2 fingers from a go-kart accident. And he had built his own go-kart, and all I remember about it had a Briggs and Stratton engine.
Yep.
And this transmission from a Ford Pinto. And he would drive it up front. He had welded up the frame, but he had to reach back, and it wasn't running right. And it had, I'll bet, I think it sounds like a roller chain.
Yep. That's
Yep.
exactly it.
He
And it was
reached
a
back.
Briggs and Stratton too, because I had a go-kart, and that was I guess maybe they were a popular engine for like,
Yeah.
This is
small,
not
like,
where I do the ad read for Briggs
Yeah,
and Stratton Grow.
Yeah, hilarious.
We're not allowed.
So he reaches back to adjust the carburetor or something, and he ran his fingers through. The chain didn't come off; it went through the teeth. So, and they were in rural Wyoming. There was no, So for the rest of his life, he's missing to here. But of course, he worked in the shop and fixed everything fine. But my favorite part of the story is that on Sundays we would go to church, and he would sit in church, and the little kids would all stare at him because he had a habit. You know how you lean against your
Right.
He had a habit of leaning it. Then, of course,
man.
once he figured it out, he played it to great effect for little kids.
So I I started out at a little community college in Seminole County, Oklahoma. And I think they have taken the community college out of the name, or junior college, and it's like called Seminole State. But I got a scholarship there to play lead guitar in this band they had, and was a kind of like PR wing of the college. And so we would go around and we would do state fairs and we would do high schools and, play like, whatever was popular in rock and country at the time.
Mm.
And the other guitarist was a guy named Steve McBride. And he was from the little town to the east of Seminole called Wewoka. And his ring finger, his forefinger of his left hand, was gone to, I guess, the first knuckle. And he had run it into a bandsaw, I believe, or a table saw. And he was an adult when this happened. And he was also a guitar player. And so he drove himself to the hospital, the little emergency room there. And he said that the doctor said, well, what do you do? And he said, well, I do kind of construction stuff. I do some carpentry. He goes, well, do you do anything intricate with your hands? He goes, well, I play guitar. And the doctor goes, well, I want to save as much of your finger as you can, so hold it up. And so he described how he held his own hand up, and the doctor had to use whatever they use in trauma wards, emergency rooms, to kind of clip the bone at the end of the finger so he could close enough skin over it to put the suture, around it to put the sutures in. And he goes, I was holding my own hand and pieces of my bone were hitting me in the face as he clipped it with I know. And I was just like, oh man. But he had, if you're a guitar player, you can see where the potential benefit of this. He could actually like fret an A chord he had pretty large fingers, and the end of it was a kind of perfect for an A chord. Like the very tip was like this big, almost like a thumb, but flat.
So he had like a capo for a finger.
He had a capo finger. Absolutely. That's exactly the way to put it. So he could do this weird stuff, and I would look over at him and we'd be playing. And I'd be like, man, how are you getting, this or that? And he was like, well, remember, I can just,
I remember when I was first trying to learn just your basic chords on guitar, and I was almost in my 30s, so I started really late, and I had a buddy who could play pretty well, and I just kept telling him I can't do it. I think I just don't have the ability, and I said, plus I have pretty small hands, and that's hard. And he said, yeah, you might want to meet my friend Tommy. And so there's this guy, he's a lead guitarist, can play like crazy, but he had some sort of arthritic condition where he'd had his knuckles actually removed and fused. So he had these short, tiny, and so he's riffing. It's like, yeah, okay, I just won't bring up my small hand anymore.
Wow.
And then, of course, Django Reinhardt.
I say Django with the two fingers.
Incredible.
Doing bebop runs. In your,
absolutely incredible. I still have a buddy I met in grad school at OSU when I started my master's, and he is a very accomplished singer, songwriter. And when I first met him, I noticed that he's left-handed, so his left hand is I don't know, I'm sure that there is a updated term for this, but his mother had taken thalidomide, and so he had a birth defect, right, where his left hand is sort of just like the ball or the heel rather of our palms, and then he has these very small digits. And so he plays guitar backwards, right? So he frets with his right hand, but he has converted this birth defect to this extraordinary, like he uses this as a combination of pick and pad. And I mean, to hear the guy, I mean, if you meet him and you were told he's an accomplished guitarist, you would have been like, what? But to see and hear him is really extraordinary. And it's not like, oh, this guy is good despite, like, he is exceptionally good and is accomplished on a number of different, I mean, he plays banjo, he plays mandolin. So yeah, when I hear about the guy with your friend with the quote small hands, like, yeah, it's fascinating what people can do when they just decide, I'm going to do this thing.
That's what I'm going to do. Yeah. I think we both know the feeling, actually.
Yeah, that's right.
Say more about that. You both know the feeling. Give me an
Well,
example.
I think I'd love to hear this story. And by the way, you mentioned Black Angus. So we had Holsteins because it was a milk. And I love Holsteins to this day. They're just my favorite thing to see in the field. They're so giant. And yet we worked tight. You lean into them while you're milking. And in Wisconsin, it would be so cold outside, but the barn would be warm and you're milking next to this giant force of nature.
Right.
They were by and large gentle. You'd get kicked every once in a while, and then my dad had jerseys for a little while because they had better butter fat. It was a better milk, but they didn't milk very much. And he said the only thing he liked about the jerseys was their eyes. And then because they're just so beautiful, like kittens. And then he said, and plus when they kicked you compared to a Holstein, it was like a love tap. But I remember at some point, and I think you'll back me up on this. So I'm not super familiar with beef other than the work I did in Wyoming, but my dad at one point got one Angus. I almost want to say that it had something to do with them throwing a smaller calf. So sometimes you'd get the Holstein bred to an Angus for her first go around because then there was less complications. Anyway, we had one cow that had a Black Angus in her, and she lasted about a year because she was the nastiest. If there was a hole in the fence in 200 acres, she would find it and lead everyone through.
Right. Yeah. They have different personalities. I mean, people may or may not be surprised to hear that, depending on how much experience you have with cattle. But, we had cows that were they were like big pets. They were sweet. And that my calf that I showed at the state fair, she hated me. She hated my gut. She had it in for me. I was a skinny little, 11-year-old kid, and she would butt me around, and so I'd have to get up every morning, lead her to water, and, work on, getting her to stand to be curried. And like my granddad, he'd just walk over to her and she'd just completely go. But she would see me coming, and boy, she would just flail me around.
Yeah, we had one Holstein that was just, you're right. It wasn't just the Angus, that particular one made an impression, but we had a Holstein that just would take you at every opportunity. And Dad finally had to get rid of her because I remember he sent me out one time. All the cows would come in and find their stalls and everything except her, and you'd have to go out and find her. And she would actually try to run you down. And I remember I went out to find her one night, and we had a big mallet, wooden handle with a big rubber head on it, and it was for banging the feed bin when the feed would get hung up.
Right.
And so I took that with me, and I went out, and sure enough, she sees me and she comes after me. Well, I was in pretty good shape at the time, and I remember I knew I couldn't outrun her, but I could outturn her. So I'd run till she was almost on me, and then I'd hang a sharp left, and then I'd run for a while. And I kept doing that, but finally she just wasn't quitting, and so I was like, I'm in trouble here. So I just remember I was running toward the fence. It was woven wire fence with a double strand of barb at top, and I was running out of gas, and she wasn't. And I remember I said, I got one chance. So on the run, I turn around and I fling that mallet at her head just as hard as I could, and missed clean. And so then I turned around, and I just remember launching myself over that fence, and catching the very top strand, but I flipped over to the other side.
Oh, man.
So yeah, it was a great adventurous life. I'm sure you had the same. But yeah, tell me just how you go from Oklahoma beef cattle to a shelf full of books.
Yeah, so I didn't really grow up. Well, I shouldn't say really. I didn't grow up reading because I couldn't sit still that long. Didn't do well in high school, and I wanted to play guitar and run around with my buddies and chase girls and everything else but read. But my first semester in junior college, community college, first class I had, a gentleman walks in, the professor, Dr. Robert Hill, and Robert had been a drummer in a band called the Baker Brothers, and it was one of those bands they opened for everybody. Like he had stories about like all these, legends that they'd opened for, and they were a really great band, and they were always on the edge of making it, like always right there, but it never happened, right? But they made a good living for the, 5, 6 guys in the band. And he was their drummer for 20 years, and he got to be about 50. And he had a PhD from the University of Tulsa before the band really took off, and he sunk 2 decades in it. But he got to be 50 and he's like, I can't do it anymore. Right. So he got this job at this community college. And I was in the first class he ever taught, and he was the professor of the first class that I ever took. And I wrote my personal essay for him, the assignment. And I think I'd written really much of anything up to that time, 18 years old. And when I got it back from him, it was just covered with ink. And there was a long note. And he said, Mr. Gwyn, I predict that one day you will earn a fair living with a pen. And he could have told me that, I would one day learn to fly, and it would make just about as much sense.
Sure.
And so he said, come talk to me. And now I've been a professor for 20 years myself. And now I know one of the things that was on his mind is like, oh, he plagiarized this. Like this kid lifted this thing. But after I went and talked to him for a while, he realized, well, that wasn't the case. And so he was like, I'm going to put you on an accelerated writing program. I'm just going to come to me, and I'm going to give you books, and you read them, and, you write what you want to. Really remarkable guy. And we got to be friends. And I can remember before I went to a 4-year college, the semester before, I told him, because he was always talking about James Joyce's Ulysses. I was like, I want to read Ulysses. So he put together a kind of seminar class just for me. And we spent the summer reading Ulysses, a chapter a week. And that's the kind of generosity he had. And just realized that I was serious about books. And so because of him and because of his attention, I realized I loved literature and really, really got bitten by it. And because of him, I knew I could write a little bit. And so, I went from, undergraduate to doing a master's in English literature at Oklahoma State University. And while I was there, I began trying to write short stories, and it was my mid-20s, and got more and more serious about it. And I couldn't get a short story to work. I would get it to almost work. I would get pieces of it to work. And had a buddy who was a professor at East Central University, where I did my bachelor's. And he was a really, really, really good reader. And they're difficult to find, but he could read a short story you'd written and tell you what the piece actually had accomplished, what it actually did. And he could even tell you what it didn't accomplish, and could sometimes tell you, which is even more exceptional, what it would need to do in order to work. So I would write a new short story, I'd send it to him, and he would be like, okay, well, this and this works out, but there's this other thing. So eventually I just set myself to write a short story that would make it through his gauntlet, right? And so by that time, I was in the PhD program at University of Denver doing a creative writing PhD in fiction writing. And I was in my first year when I got a short story to work. And by that, I mean, I sent it to him. And I mean, I'd become just accustomed to, well, this works, but that doesn't work. And he wrote me back and he said, this is great. And I can't write like this. I wish I could. And so I immediately called him. And I said, please explain to me what I did. because I didn't know, right? I was able to have written this thing, but I didn't understand why it worked. I didn't understand why it was good. And so he showed me why that particular short story functioned, how it functioned, why it functioned, what it did. And then I became obsessed. I have to do another. Like if it's one, maybe it's a fluke, but if I can do it twice, right? Then maybe I can actually do this. And so those stories, I'd begin to send those out. Those began to be published and got me to where I am.
I sent them chills because those people that help us I think I said somewhere along the line, the ones who show us the path before we even know the path. Mm-hmm. And I think I just misquoted myself, but I can't do any better right now. It's the ones who show us the way before the way is clear is what I always said. And yeah, I had that, our stories as to how we wound up here are definitely a Venn diagram because some things very different, but some experiences overlapping. The one that made me chuckle, my first plagiarism accusation came in 5th grade.
Amazing.
From one of my favorite teachers. And my parents had to come in and say, no, this is him. He's reading books day after day after day. And I was raised in an obscure fundamentalist Christian sect with no TV, no radio, no movies, but mom filled the house with books. So I was very much and to this day, I can't diagram a sentence, but write by ear. And so I had the plagiarism experience. And then I was, of course, in nursing school. And the two signal moments for me that, again, happened, and then I moved on. I didn't realize what they were at the time. One was in 7th grade. I had a 7th grade English teacher who was very tough. We came in one day, we were going to do ready to do the usual, and she had pasted a black and white photo of an old farmhouse on the blackboard. And she said, your assignment for today is to write whatever you want about that photo. Well, we were locked up, right? Because you're 7th grade English students. You think, I need an assignment. You can't.
Yep.
But I remember writing, and I think I've talked to Matt about this. I remember writing this pretty trite little bit of fluff. But what I never forgot was all of a sudden I had the same visceral thrill in the act of creation that I did when I got in a pickup truck going 70 miles an hour, that I got when I played football, that I got when I went deer hunting. And I went, wait a minute. And then, of course, right back to being a football, playing deer hunting, pickup truck driving knucklehead. Got into nursing school, very prescribed, obvious a path there. But it was one of those, you've heard so many awful things about them, one of those liberal arts schools.
Yeah.
And I've written about the fact I did resent it. I thought, why am I studying intro to film when I should be in surgery? Well, it turns out you can study intro to film and go to surgery.
That's right.
And so
Absolutely.
I remember taking a creative writing, probably half a credit creative writing class just to fill a humanities credit, went in and with the very first assignment, a poem, went, oh my gosh, I remember this feeling from 7th grade. I still love it. And then the part that overlaps with you somewhat is the professor was so tough. And this was back in the day, like he read your stuff in front of the class. And then when it was your day and he was merciless and yes, a red pen and all that. And I remember watching people wilt. And then I remember the day it was my day and I showed up and I handed in a poem and I was looking forward to this because this was some pretty good stuff. I don't think folks quite realized what kind of a treat they were in for.
Right.
And then he proceeds to read it and then just destroyed it. And again, smart stuff, right? And the new surprise for me was I didn't feel like my feelings weren't hurt. Instead, I felt like I was in football practice because I was the kid who, if the coach said, hit him harder, and I was go, okay, I sure will. And everything he said, instead of going, no, wait, that's my baby, I was like, oh, and I couldn't wait to get home to revise. So I was, and then again, several years passed before I didn't even conceive that you could be a writer if you came from my background.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely didn't. I didn't know any writers. I didn't know what publishing was. I didn't know how these things happened, and didn't have much of interest in it until I got into college and met Robert Hill. Something that you say there. My grandparents put me in kickboxing when I was 11, and it took a while, but I was very focused on it and I
Mm.
put a lot into it. I began to get good and I won tournaments and blah, 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 whatever. Um, but I knew from that experience, and we had an instructor that I adored and I wanted to please him. I knew that if you practiced and practiced and practiced, that you would get good at something.
Mhm.
And it was a matter of the time you sunk into it and the matter of a really obsessive practice. So when my friend Mark, read my stories and said, well, this works, but this stuff doesn't. With a person with a different background, because I've seen people like this, and they had plenty of talent, they were plenty bright, but when someone critiqued their stuff, they would get offended or angry, whatever it was. But for me, it was familiar from kickboxing. And I was like, oh, I just need to practice more. And I want to complete this goal, right? I want to get one to the instructor that the instructor approves of, because I knew like it might not work out at first. You might get hit
Yeah.
quite a bit, right? But there's this reward on the other end of it. And I think there's something to that. And this is why I think athletics are important for young men. Not for everybody. Everybody's not cut out for it. But I think it does instill a sense of discipline. It does teach you that, yeah, you're going to get into something that you want to do and you're going to suck at it for a long time. But there's an enormous reward to moments where you realize, oh, I've gotten better at this.
Well, I think, and all of this stuff, I'm sorry, go.
No,
finish.
that's it.
Yeah.
That was it, sir.
So all of this stuff, and you already hinted at it, it all requires an asterisk, and there are exceptions. And one of the things I'm always careful with when I talk about what I'm about to talk about is, we've just suffered terribly from anti-intellectualism in this world. So none of this is anti the academy. I just took a different path. And I just got a text. I thought I had everything silenced, but when I just got a text from one of my friends with an MFA, and he's teaches literature at a highfalutin school. So none of this is about what's better or worse. It's just the unexpected ways that your background can equip you. And I think you mentioned athletics. Same with me. Like, I'm the most non-confrontational fellow you're ever going to meet. In fact, my wife says sometimes too much so. And yet I unreservedly loved the violence of football.
Right.
It was within a parameter. There were rules, and you could just haul off and smash somebody. And I loved it. And so I understood that part of me, but then I also understood that when you start talking, I think our backgrounds, part of it was the football, the kickboxing, but part of why I also, and again, asterisks, but part of the reason that I'm glad I came from a poor farm family and logged and watched people lose fingers, and I think part of the reason that you're grateful for coming from an Oklahoma ranch, we have positive, well, I shouldn't say we, I'll speak for myself. I have positive imposter syndrome constantly, where
Me
I go,
too.
I can't believe I get to do this.
Yes.
And I was once in New York or in San Francisco for a very fancy, or no, it was LA for a very fancy literary something. And I happened to be in the green room with a spread of unbelievable food, and we're staying in an unbelievable hotel. And back home it was 10 below and my brother was logging, right?
Right.
And this very well-known author who's still out there today, who's a complete, privileged background, East Coast, capital A artist, capital N novelist. Also, by the way, extremely talented. This isn't about that.
Absolutely.
But he just said, well, what do you think your hotel room? And I was like, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And he said, I just don't like this hotel. And then he just said, and this food. And I was like, oh my gosh, dude.
Right.
And all I could do was think of sitting down at the table with 10 brothers and sisters eating whatever came through with some government cheese, and my brother out logging, right? This seems like a great gig.
I totally get that that perspective. I mean, I felt
We also both, I think, would know plenty of hardworking blue collar folks who are complete idiots. So I mean, that's
Of
yeah.
course. I mean, it's the whole spectrum is there. I always felt like there was a moment, I think when my first book sold when I was in grad school, toward the end of my PhD program at Denver. That's the first moment, 2003, where I felt like I stepped into a world that was unreal to me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, this is all a dream.
Yeah.
Right. This is not supposed to happen for guys like me. And you just understand whatever happens, from here on out, like you're completely in the black here. Right. You weren't right. You're not supposed to get here. You're not supposed to get to this place. And so
this go-kart has a chain somewhere.
Yeah, this go-kart. Yeah. And so you get caught up, right? Because whatever your concerns are, that's what you're faced with. Whatever you want, that's what you're driving at. And so you can lose that perspective. But then if you pull back a little bit, you're like, my brother's out there logging in the cold. I grew up with the severed limbs as carpeting the ground, right? So,
nobody knows I'm this far away from them
That's
where
right.
they are.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, I think it's grounding, and I do believe it does heighten your gratitude. And I think that, I've written just recently stuff that's, as artful as I can possibly make it.
Mm-hmm.
But because I'm fully self-employed as a writer, I also, there's a van sitting right outside this little room filled with boxes of my books that I toted up to northern Wisconsin to give a reading in a supper club the other night. And we sold not only some books, but some T-shirts.
Right.
And
that's
so
awesome.
I will have occasionally some of those folks, like the one I just mentioned, say, well, I don't care to trouble myself with self-promotion and that sort of thing. I go,
right.
Oh, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, you're right.
Because I could be literally shoveling cow manure because I grew up doing that. And there's
Right.
nothing wrong with it, but
nothing wrong with it.
To have found this. And I think, you mentioned when your first book came out and how you felt. I remember being at BEA in LA one time back when there was a little more money to slosh around, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
And I was out at BEA and I was up for some award for one of my books that I did not win. But I think it was 4 of us were nominees, and the other 3 people were quite well known and very accomplished. And we had to get up in front of this big crowd and just impromptu offer a few words. And of course, the other 3 went before me, and they were all eloquent and erudite and all the things you'd expect. And I'm sitting there going, what am I going to say? So I just stood up and I said, I feel like a guy who got on the wrong bus, but it's a great bus.
I completely resonate with that.
Yeah. I think it keeps you in touch with, speak to this too in your own work. How don't you feel living close to the ground just keeps you in tune with okay, I'll just be blunt. I live in an area, northern Wisconsin, where I'm on the fire department. My neighbors and friends and many of my relatives, we do not see the world the same way, to put it lightly.
Right.
And yet I know that they're the ones who are going to drop everything and come and help me, not somebody posting incessantly on Instagram.
That's right.
And
that's exactly right.
Go
ahead, please, sir.
No, that's kind of my lead in to speak to that blue collar meets art thing.
Well, yeah. One of the things that I don't know, sometimes I'll post about it and it upsets people on Twitter. Sometimes it upsets people. Other people get something out of it. But I have been disturbed increasingly the more everything in our country has become politics, that people they've decided everything is political, everything is politics. And that's all fine. People should do what they want to do, and more power to them. It really bothers me when I hear that people have lost friends and family members over politics. Like, that really bothers me. And I'm like, how I feel about that is, when you have a flat tire, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, and Mitch McConnell, they're not going to come over and help you. When you're sick in the hospital, Nancy Pelosi's not going to come pulling up, right? So your parasocial relationships with these strangers that I'm not saying are unimportant, but if you like push away the actual human beings in your life for people you will never meet, I think that's a problem.
I think is a huge problem. And, I am criticized sometimes, and I'll even accept the criticism. Maybe I am a coward, but I get pushed sometimes to speak out definitively on one particular political issue or another. And I have to explain that even to those I agree with, I say, you understand that at this point, if you go to one of my events, like if you went to that one in northern Wisconsin the other night, if you saw the voting rolls, they definitely slanted one way, but they weren't 100%. And I want it to be that way because I am able, in talking like I was raised and telling stories about guys getting kicked by dead cows and talking about logging, but also talking about art and metaphor and hope and spirituality.
That's right.
In a context where we all then have a conversation. And the minute that I get into what I call the binary in the political sense, then that's it. I used up all my powder and it's over. And so I think that I wrote in one of my books about being up north fishing in this very remote part of Canada. And I have 2 daughters, and we've done a combination of Montessori, homeschool, public school, public charter school. They, whatever seemed to work best for each kid. And at the time, one of our daughters was going to kind of an odd, well, some called it squirrel school. And then the other one was in our little local small town public school, and both were having tremendous experiences. And I'm up in this very rural part of Canada with this guy, and he starts asking about my kids. And I said, well, we have these 2 daughters, and one of them's we've done some homeschooling. And he said, oh, good, get it. And then he did the whole road, get them out of the clutches of those. And then he used all the terminology that you recognized came straight from talk radio.
Sure.
And I just said, well, no, I said, actually, our experience has been very positive. And, we haven't made these decisions for political reasons. We made them based on the child's needs and the opportunities and what's available. And he proceeded to spend the next 15 minutes telling me to deny my own experience, basically.
Yep.
And the line that I wrote, and then later I went to borrow something from him in his cabin, and he 24/7 in the beautiful wilds of Canada was listening to just blasting news stuff all day.
Right.
And I said later, all of us, and by the way, I do mean both sides. Let me also say, I'm as susceptible as the next person. I have to have talks with myself all the time.
Me too.
I said, what you almost said word for word is it's gotten to where we would rather listen to the man yelling in the distance than the person in the boat beside us.
That's right.
And you're the guy who's going to
correct.
The person who's going to change your tire, or the little lady who lives down in the valley that I can see her lights at night, and she and I could not disagree more on religion, on politics, and everything. And when my brother's little boy was killed and I had to run and help him, she was here and just said, "We'll be, come back whenever you're ready."
That's what matters.
Yeah.
Those are the people that matter, because those are the people you actually know.
And I think also, I've talked a lot about, and we've already both, I think, referred to it, but like, I have a thing I wrote one time about taking my daughters to the Shakespeare Festival one night and then to the Demolition Derby at the county fair the next day.
I love it.
And well, but the other important point I try to make about that is that please don't interpret that as me saying I'm pretty wonderful because I've figured out how to enjoy. It's like, no, don't cheat yourself of the vast array of joy available in this world.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. What you said, I want to look at that again, because you said this thing, you talked about people wanting you to proclaim loudly about a particular political issue. And you have the sense, from it's a term from musketry, like you're going to shoot up all your powder the moment that you like. And that can be fine. Maybe there comes a time in your life and there's a particular issue and you're the particular person to say it, where you're like, you know what? This is worth shooting up my powder on. But there's also the understanding that It takes a long time to reload.
Yeah. Well, I think, what I always say is if you read my stuff and you can't figure it out where I stand, then
Right.
you're just not reading close enough. And then there has been at least one particular instance where I did feel that, it's like, no, I need to just say this is how I feel. But then it's once
Right.
and move on. But yeah, I think the thing that's, and I have to be careful because again, none of this is, I've got it figured out. Every day I wonder, I'm just a vat of self-doubt.
Mm-hmm.
But I do notice too, like over the years, with some of these arts cuts lately, and I've had people say, well, we really need, we need to get this back or that back. And I go, I've been doing book readings in rural Wisconsin for 20 years. You couldn't do that too. You can read poetry in a gym in Luck, Wisconsin too.
That's right.
You don't have to wait for a program.
That's
I
right.
promise you the gymnasium is there. The room is there waiting.
is
And that's
there.
a tricky thing to say because I'm terrified of sounding like I'm, I also get paid. Like I'm in business, but, and I think ultimately, like you just said, you're just cheating yourself of texture and dimension. If you can, the joy of a Shakespeare sonnet and then the joy of some knucklehead from down the road crashing his car into your buddy's car to see who wins the $12 trophy.
It's fantastic.
Beautiful.
It is
it's
fantastic.
living. Oh.
And you'd be surprised how many of the people at the demolition derby crack open novels and books of poetry. I mean, you start talking to people and like the people at the demolition derby and the people at the poetry reading are going to be way more complicated and way harder to pin down on a variety of experiences.
I had one of my more roughneck anti-intellectual buddies grumping at me one day about NPR listeners.
Right.
And I said, listen, I happen to have stumbled into a career where I've shaken the hands of thousands of NPR listeners.
Right.
And you'd be surprised how many of them are calloused.
Yep. That's really well said.
So
that's really well said.
And the other I do get brave enough occasionally too. Again, I can pass because I still, I go on the fire department and they tease me about going to modern dance recitals. But because I show up when and by the way, I don't actively fight fire anymore. I'm still a first responder, but I just never want to oversell that business. I'm not into the heroic hoo-ha. That's just silly, but it's a privilege to serve with your neighbors.
I love it. I love it.
But I think that they allow me to pass just enough that occasionally I can jab them a little bit too. And like, I love to, I was just reading again about the founding fathers, as everyone loves to call them. It's like, those are some complicated dudes. They were reading.
Very complicated.
Some of them spoke French and read philosophy.
That's right.
And the other thing I like to tell my buddies is, that turbocharger on that diesel you like to roll coal with? That turbocharger was invented by a European with a PhD.
Yeah, no, that's the founders are. I'm quite partial to them, and they are incredibly complex people, and not without their flaws, as all of us are. But they all saw the same thing at a particular time. They all threw their hats in the ring. And, as Franklin was reported to have said, after they signed the Declaration, we can now hang separately or we can hang together.
Yeah.
Right. We've crossed the Rubicon. Like there's no losing this thing. And all of those guys, with their various flaws, they risked it all.
Well, and you mentioned the flaws, and that's another thing culturally. If we just continue to play a zero-sum game, it ain't going to work out.
It's not going to work out.
Yeah,
it's not going to work out.
Yeah.
You got to believe that people can change. You got to believe that they can grow. You have to allow a space for redemption. And in doing that, you allow it for yourself as well.
And that's the biggie right there, because when I look back at who I was when I was 16 and then who I was when I was in my mid-20s, and I was always a relatively thoughtful fellow, and I was nonetheless an idiot.
Same.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
Well, but what is that? That's like that flaws, the flaw in ourselves, like being hyper aware of that flaw growing up. in different settings where you recognize the imbalance, Aaron, when you're getting walked into that garage for the cow story at the beginning.
Right.
Like, it's like they're the adults. They know what they're doing.
Right.
They just said, do you want to cut? There's like this inherent awareness of like, there's lots of stuff in the world I just don't know about yet. And then it slowly becomes, aspects of it become more attainable. Not all of it, like aspects of it. There's a relationship to like knowing flaws now as adults looking back versus how you learned that. What the hell is that?
That's a great question. I'm not a person that thinks that everything is unknowable. I know there are people that's like, it's all a big mystery, and maybe that's what they see. I don't feel that way about it, but I also am skeptical of certainty and sometimes frightened by it because I see the most strident people on the left, the most strident people on the right. However they divvy up, they have a kind of certainty that is, I don't know, it makes me very nervous. And
Well, it's back to that separate, like once you've committed to the polls, I forget how Mike put it a little while ago. It's like once you've decided you're over there,
right,
you shot all your powder again.
You've shot all your powder.
My wife and I were just talking about this, and the word that I use, and it's funny because we agree 100%. The people who frighten me, and in my case, I use the term certitude.
Yeah.
Man, certitude freaks me out. And I think my journey from that was kind of a reverse journey because I mentioned briefly earlier, I was raised in an obscure fundamentalist Christian sect. That's the definition of what it was. It was loving. It was gentle. It in the end, they've suffered the same attenuating circumstances that so many of those groups have.
Right.
I left years ago, but not in anger, just slowly over time, read a little poetry and a little philosophy. And like my daddy told me, that's going to wreck. But anyways, I came from a place where I do remember certitude, and it was comforting. It was we were in this tiny little church that no one had ever heard of. And yet I knew that we were the only ones that were going to get to go to heaven. And the comfort of that. And so I understand the attraction, and it's also partly why I don't belittle it.
That's right.
I believed it with all my heart and with a yearning that others might share in it.
That's right.
But then it also is why and I literally had the born again experience, and I did the thing, and then slowly over time went in other directions. And that certitude, I hope what it gives me is the memory of that certitude, I hope, gives me a little more compassion.
Yeah, I was raised Pentecostal. My grandmother's family both her parents were Pentecostal evangelists and pastors. And my uncle was an aunt were Pentecostal pastors. So I was deep in that experience, and I left when I was 16, or thought I did. For myself, I'm not sure one ever leaves entirely. Those sorts of things. And I, returned to my own faith in Christ, a little, in my late 20s, and found a kind of peace in it. I couldn't be the extreme believer I was when I was 13 or 14 or 15. And I don't, like you say though, I don't have disdain for that. I understand the attraction. I understand the ecstasy, the rapture of that experience. And I think it's real, and I think people experience. For me personally, I felt it was gonna consume me, and not in a good way. But it so often, when talking with various people, and sometimes very educated people, very impressive people, when the topic would come to politics, I would see the same kind of fervor and the same kind of kamikaze abandon. And it scares me.
On a lighter note, I'd love to talk a little bit about the the effect that both of our faith backgrounds have on our writing. Because I mentioned before, I've not, I don't remember if we were recording or not, that not because I'm against it or because I'm in recovery or anything, but I've never had a drop of alcohol. I've never taken any recreational drugs. And yet I can, if I may, I mean, I can crank a sentence sometimes that you might think that maybe I'd had a mushroom. And to me, and I'm thinking of Cormac McCarthy's language too. And so much of that comes from the church, and so much.
That's right.
I think in this, I did the Panoptica essay. I said, to this day, I love the cadence of the King James.
Oh my gosh. I was getting ready to say it. I was getting ready to say, like, it so much is from the King James Bible.
Yeah. What do the thee and the thou, the wilt and the shalt, it was like, oh man, that's jazz. That's beautiful, beautiful music. So I think, and even when you, in my case, left faith, and in your case, I guess adjusted it, it's still, you're open because that part of you has been opened in the past. You don't have to pry it open. You felt it already.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because I had to, I suppose, I don't know if I had to or not, but it's what I did. I had to go the other direction with as much fervor, right, as I had in the church, before I recognized, like, this is the same process. And I began to meet more and more people who claimed to be atheists, but were absolutely fundamentalists. They just didn't believe in God. They were fundamentalists about something else.
Yes, correct.
And so then I began to, once I encountered that among professors, people who are good people who are kind, people who are very intelligent and very well educated. But when it came to politics, I'm like, well, this is religion. Like, I know this. Like, I recognize this. These are claims of faith, and I don't have a problem with claims of faith, but don't get it twisted, right?
The hats, the bumper stickers, the T-shirts, they're the sacraments, man.
That's right.
So I think, I love what you said. I resonated with so much of that. I think about going, I never did go way in either direction. I was always a pretty good practical boy and always have remained so. And I've been writing lately about that little part of you that wishes you were the total off the rails badass artist because they create some amazing stuff.
Gosh.
But then also being 60 and going, but I kind of like being alive and healthy and having 2 nice daughters. And, it's like, where is that line? And I think so in my case, I never revolted. I never renounced or denounced. I just sort of drifted, and I continue to drift. But I think that the only time that someone gets my hackles up is when they start, and I've had some folks of faith do this to me. They treat me like a little mindlessly lost lamb. And I'm like, oh, no. I think about this every day. Some guy recently, and I don't think he meant it, and in the end he retracted, but he said, "You're apathetic agnosticism." And I said, "Oh, that first word, no.
You don't seem apathetic at all to me, my friend. Like, you seem very thoughtful about all of this. I think, it's meaningful to you, even if you've gone in a different direction with it."
So Cormac McCarthy, so I'm a guy who's read widely but spottily, and I have terrible retention. And as you know, I have vivid memories of reading Blood Meridian. To me, that was the closest.
Hard not to,
man. Hardest I've ever come to taking drugs is just reading that book.
It is psychedelic, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's very psychedelic.
So did you read him early, late, when?
So my experience with that is, in 1998, at the tail end of doing my master's degree, people were talking about him, but a buddy of mine, Todd Peterson, who's a writer, he was finishing his PhD there at OSU and talked about all the pretty horses all the time. I mean, he just loved it. It really, really spoke to him. And I respected Todd enough I was like, I'm going to give this a try. So I got a copy of All the Pretty Horses. I read it. I liked it. It didn't set me on fire in the way it did other people at the time. And Brian Evanson was my fiction writing professor, and I would follow him to the University of Denver a few years later. I really, really respected his taste and his judgment. And he just said, man, Blood Meridian is doing things with language. McCarthy in Blood Meridian is doing things with language I've never seen anyone else do. I think it's really special. So just for the language, I decided to read it in the summer of 99.
Mhm.
And at first, I recognized the brilliance of the language, but the violence and the suffering of it, I think some part of me was resistant to it a little bit in some way. I saw the tremendous skill and the beauty, but the book on my first reading kind of kept me at a distance. So I kind of chipped away at it over the course of that summer and fall. But then I hit a kind of stride with it in the last 100 pages, and all of a sudden just like consumed it. By the time I hit the end, I was like, what just happened to me? I was really powerfully affected. I called my buddy, the Mark, who I've referred to, who was responding to my short stories. And he had read the book, and I read those final paragraphs to him. I was like, man, this guy is really something else, isn't he? He goes, yeah. And we were talking about writers who we considered, we would call different writers third-rate Faulkner. And so I read those final paragraphs, and he goes, that's first-rate Faulkner. And I'm like, yeah, it really is. So I immediately went back. I jumped back to the beginning and read it over again. And that second read, I began to, it's like playing music, right? It took me a while to get my instrument in tune with Cormac, right? I was a little out of tune with him, but once, those final 100 pages really tuned me in. And when I started it over, like, I was like, this is the greatest thing I've ever read. And so became a serious student of that book, and then worked my way through the catalog. And after No Country for Old Men came out, I got an advance copy to review. I was really affected by that book very powerfully. And then I read it a couple of times, and I was like, man, I want to read some new McCarthy. So I went back to All the Pretty Horses, which I had thought was just okay. And it hit me across it just slammed into me. And I was like, I don't know, how did I miss how skillful this is? How did I miss how beautiful and proficient this novel is? And that was 2005, and I've been teaching that and Blood Meridian semester after semester for 20 years.
Well, two things. One was what you just said about having to reread it and get yourself in tune. I think of that with music, where you go through that stage where you're focused on the guy playing the rip and solo. And then you hit that stage where you go, did you hear what the bass player just did?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's right.
And then I want to say for the record that I consider myself a second-rate Louis L'Amour. That's a little inside,
That's
but
a good place
you're
to be.
there.
That's a good place to be.
That's great.
That's a good place to be.
I'm a huge, people say, oh, you're this enormous Van Halen fan. Well, I'm an enormous fan of Edward Van Halen. I think whatever, he happened to be in a hard rock party band, but he could have been a classical pianist and composer. I don't think there has been a more brilliant musician in terms of technique and skill and composition in my lifetime. So I'm an enormous Edward Van Halen fan. But because of his technical brilliance, what I first keyed in on were his brilliant lead lines and his technical prowess and his speed and but as you listen and you start to learn those songs on the guitar, you recognize his brilliance as a rhythm player. You recognize, the choices he makes for, this chord inversion, this particular voicing. So, as a young person, you're hit with the tone and the fire and all this stuff, but then you key into this stuff that's actually more, becomes more impressive because you're like, oh, he could do this other thing too.
There's more Rachmaninoff.
Yes.
That level of Rachmaninoff where you're like,
that's right.
You can laugh at that keyboard part of Jump or whatever, but like, think about what's going on.
It's pretty brilliant. Like in that opening, that keyboard riff, like that.
It's understated. That's like a satisfaction level guitar riff where you're like, this sounds so dumb to you, you don't realize how amazing this is.
Yeah, that keyboard riff made that album like the #2 album in the world. And it's that particular keyboard riff that we've heard so many times and in so many different covers that it's part of our vocabulary. Now, anyway, I don't want to start waxing poetic about Eddie Van Halen because that'll be all we do.
Beautiful.
Edward Van Halen and King James have a lot.
Yeah.
I took a few notes before I have you guys here for eternity. I need to ask you a couple of questions. And then we're going to play the game of if what I wrote down on the back of my card. You're going to guess who I wanted you to meet today. I want to go back straight to the beginning. I want to make sure I got these. We got voluntold. That's a
good one.
That's a good expression. Armstrong pitchforks. That was a good
Love
one.
it.
What stop saver? I can't write my own.
Step saver.
Step saver. Oh, because he was saving you the steps.
You were saving steps, yeah.
And then the FFA acronym, Father Farms Alone. Was that the one?
That's amazing.
It's supposed to be Future Farmers of America. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah, okay.
I can't remember if it was clarified or not, but it came out. It came out in the wash there. Okay, I'm asking a question. This one goes to you first, Mike. Aaron told the story about the cow being slaughtered, having risen again, and then falling again on the 3rd minute. It's King James shout out for you.
Nice.
And
speaking of playing jazz,
he comes in and he says that, and he just goes, huh, after Aaron says he stood up. This might be my favorite word of this entire thing. What is it about a word like, huh? I can tell the whole story, Mr. Performer Mike Perry.
This is amazing. I don't see, now I'm becoming suspicious because I wrote a novella called 40 Acres Deep. And it's the darkest thing I've ever written, and it's about a farmer losing his farm and faith and hope and everything. But there's a scene in there that I wrote as comedy, but only a certain small segment of blue collar folks will get it as comedy, and it's where he's using a torpedo heater. And a torpedo heater, I believe, has been completely neglected and underappreciated in the American literary scene. So I put a torpedo heater in there, and he lights it, and then when it's lit, it's in his shed. He's trying to melt the snow off the roof to save his shed and his equipment. He looks, and there's a decal on the side of that torpedo heater, which is spewing heat, and it burns kerosene, and it's very dangerous. There's a decal on the side of that heater, and it says, with exclamation points fore and aft, "Never leave your torpedo heater unattended." And in the book, the character goes, huh. And then he walks to the house.
God, that's amazing.
It's a beautiful word. It's sort of like, I'm not impressed. Is that really important? Let's move on. I don't have time to hear about your problems.
That's right.
It is a percussive separator.
It's sweet. Yeah.
If nothing else.
Huh.
Okay, Aaron, I got one for you.
Yes.
Mike was telling us the brilliance, I will dare say, of Bob the One-Eyed Beagle.
Yes.
Tattoo and just, all right. What makes a character like, I want the Bob the One-Eyed Beagle book. I want the comic book, and then maybe the movie to go along with it. Mm-hmm. Why is a character like that so unbelievable and so interesting? Default.
Yeah. Well, with Bob, the one-eyed beagle, that's a very sharpened character. That's how I would think about it in a literary sense. The character has sharp angles, and that kind of character. That character is often flat, and I don't mean that in the pejorative sense. Ian Forster says a round character basically is a character who changes. A flat character is a character who stays the same. And you need both. You need both of those in a work of fiction. You need some characters wouldn't work in stories if they change. The point of them is not to change. And so I think that our friend Bob is a flat character, but he's sharp. He's defined. You get him immediately. You have that impression. His peculiarities are part of his vividness, right?
All right. If we have to snip this out and send it to Bob, Mike, let me know. I will do the editorial work of cutting that out for you to voice message him or something.
I can just relay it in person.
Okay, Mike.
I learned something today, though. That's the flat and the round. That's really neat.
That's a really cool.
Yeah.
That's a really cool framing. And the angular.
Because you're right. He's a fascinating guy. He is fascinating to this moment, and yet he's fascinating because he never changes.
Yes.
Not boring.
You wouldn't want him to change, right?
Right.
You wouldn't want him to change. You need him to be that guy. Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool.
Wow, you taught me something like a professor.
Oh, good.
Mike, Aaron told us about Robert Hill, who was the professor who did the music thing and then had the whole pivotal experience for Aaron. And I'm curious about, and just confirm this first, Aaron. He was the drummer, right?
Yes. And I played with him too. The most brilliant drummer I've ever played with.
Mm.
Exceptional. Yeah.
All right. So, Mike, you've run into somebody like that in your life. What do you make of Aaron running into this Robert Hill and having all these layers of changes on him? Is it because of kind of this insane arc himself that Robert was on for him to pick a guy like Aaron out of the crowd?
So my guess would be that he didn't pick him. My guess is that your antenna, if you will, are up even long before you're aware that you have them. And you're just collecting experiences, and whether it's your boss in Wyoming who taught you those 2 sayings that keep you going when things get tough, or whether it's the drummer who turns out to be a literary influence. And then I think the other thing is timing. If you meet this person when you're ready and you're starting to make that shift, that's a critical time.
That really is the timing is huge.
Yeah. Like you just show up in the right place to experience it. We got a little bit, and Aaron, I'm curious for you on this one. We're talking about sort of like that line where blue collar meets art.
Mm-hmm.
And you write about this. This is in some of your work. You're very willing to go as down local as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Why does that make art? Why is art there? Why is it important to say, hey, look, this is art?
I'll say this.
Town in this small story.
When I don't know what I thought literature was when I was young, but I assumed it was exalted and it was elevated. And the first books I read when Robert began to give me books, novels, and poems, I read, I think the Odyssey, and then I read Hamlet and just loved both of those texts so much. But those are characters who are exalted people. Those are characters who are of high station, high born, and the association I had was, that's what literature is. Literature is about the high born and the exalted. It wasn't until my junior year of college, when I was in an intro to lit class, and we were assigned Flannery O'Connor's "A Good Man Is Hard to Find," that I encountered rural characters who had the same artistic grandeur and whose lives were treated as being important. And with those rural characters, I saw people I knew, people I'd grown up around. I saw my own experience. And with that one short story, O'Connor taught me, like, these people's lives can be the stuff of great story and great literature. It doesn't have to be a rich man or a king or whatever. They can make great characters too, but the lives of the people that you grew up around are worthy of great literature and can be turned into that. And then, of course, by the time I got to Faulkner, I mean, he made his entire career writing about rural people and backwoods people and people with learning disabilities and people, all these people that you wouldn't necessarily think of if you thought about great literature. But of course, their lives are as worthy of literature as anyone else's.
I love this way too much. This pains me to bring this to the end. We got to play the game. Mike, you're going first.
Okay.
Why do you think, and of course I wrote this down before we even got here, wrong answers welcome. Why do you think I was so excited to introduce you to Aaron Gwyn, Mike?
Well, the thing that you wouldn't know from, and this is not vanity, this is because it's winter in Wisconsin, is that our hairstyles are very simple. Oh. But I'm up here in a little room above the garage, so I like to keep the head warm.
You got to keep the head warm.
And I don't have flames right above my head.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure, but, I suspect it's because of some of those things that we've been talking about. There is a certain groundedness, a certain blue-collar practicality that then meshes with this love of, he was just talking about reading novels and seeing people he recognized. And I remember reading Tobacco Road by Erskine Caldwell and going, oh my gosh, those are my neighbors. And so I think there's something to the fact that we both, our joy in what we do is heightened by the fact that we not only never thought we'd be here, it just wasn't even really on the table.
Love that. Same question, Aaron.
I can't say it better than Mike just did. I don't know if that's what you were thinking, but that's what pops out to me. And it occurred to me within 30 seconds of hearing Mike talk.
As soon as we launched into dramatic farm stories, I knew this was going to go well. So I wrote down, life is full of characters. It's worth noticing.
Yeah, I gotta pass on a Cormac McCarthy quote in
Please.
terms of what you were just saying. There's a passage in All the Pretty Horses where the duenna Alfonso tells the protagonist John Grady that scars have the unique power to remind us that the past is real.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the my finger and these scars, they remind you that the past isn't an idea. It's a reality.
It's not an idea. It's not a religion. It's a lived experience.
A lived experience.
It's a full contact sport.
It's a full contact sport.
All the way through. Well, this has been fantastic. Mike, people want to find you. They want to bug you on the internet. Where should they look you up?
Sneezingcow.com, which Aaron and I never got to, but he would understand. That's from a humor album I did years ago called Never Stand Behind a Sneezing Cow. And I don't have to explain.
I love it.
He knows.
Aaron,
Sneezingcow.com, yeah.
Pretty much anything that's going on, you can find me over at Twitter at American Gwyn, GWYN. I guess it's called X now. Whatever it is, that's where I am. And whatever, new books or stories or whatever, I generally post about it there.
Fantastic. Get these guys' books. Check the stuff out. American Gwyn on Twitter is a good place to look. Lots of good insights there. And certainly the Sneezing Cow website. Get some of Mike's stuff in your life. This is Just Press Record. You're watching Cultish Creative YouTube. I'm Matt Zeigler, and we are out.
Thanks for joining us. Like, comment, and hey, subscribe below to Cultish Creative on YouTube if you haven't already. As the good compliance people want me to remind you, Matt Zeigler, that's me, is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments. The opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sunpoint Investments. No information on this podcast should be construed as investment advice. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of clients of Sunpoint Investments. I hope you've been entertained. I hope you found this useful. I hope you talk to a professional before you try any of this stuff at home. And most of all, I hope you subscribed. Be nice to each other out there. And don't forget, head over to cultishcreative.com and let's make curiosity a habit together. And I'm out.